Welcome everyone to the 5 p.m. session. Who organised this? Yeah. So however, it's yeah, just now this time. So what we're going to do this time is a little bit different from what we've done before with respect to subject area. Rather than I think a lot of us work in academia, but of course there is research out in industry, and this will be a sort of industry panel. So we have some people who are either from industry or work very closely with industry, and so we'll do the usual round of introductions. So we have some folks here and 3 others online. Waldo, can you maybe just give us a minute or two of you?
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Waldo Rosales. I work for a small company called Unilever. As you may know, the company, consumer goods. I am part of a big team called Digital R&D. More specifically, within that team, a sub-team for modeling analytics for processing and packaging. I am a computational fluid dynamics engineer, so CFD engineer. Did a nuclear engineer degree, realized that there was not much in it for me, so I moved to chemical engineering. I've been doing high performance computing simulations, mostly CFD, although some FEA and other kinds of simulations for the past 15 years. So that's pretty much me, yeah.
Perfect. Mark?
I think a number of you know me. I'm Mark Parsons. I am the Director of EPCC at the University of Edinburgh, and one day a week I'm Director of Research Computing for EPSRC. But actually the first part of my career after my PhD was I was the commercial manager of EPCC for 16, 17 years. So I spent a huge amount of time going out and talking to business, and I think, yeah, it's interesting. I've probably met people, I've met you in different incarnations many times in my career.
We have some panel members online. Whoever's in control of the magic buttons, whichever order works for you, please.
Okay, I guess that's me then. So first of all, apologies for my lack of video. My camera appears to not be playing ball today, so sorry for that. You get my smiley picture instead. So my name is Emma Hogan. I'm a senior scientific software engineer at the Met Office. Basically, at the Met Office, we call our SEs SSEs. Scientific software engineers. Before I joined the Met Office, I worked as a data process developer at Gemini Observatory in Chile. So got 2, I guess, aspects of not working at a university. Before that, I was doing my PhD, so I've got that experience as well. And yes, I'll leave it there for now.
And the next one, Ash. Hi, Ash.
Hello, folks. My name is Ash Vadgan. I'm a distinguished specialist in the defence industry, and I'm also a Deputy Director of Operations at the National Quantum Computer Centre.
Hi, my name is Tania Lard. My pronouns are she, her, and I am currently the co-director of Quantum Labs, which is an open source innovation labs, but the other side of our organization focuses mostly on consultancy around all things scientific computing, machine learning, deep learning. Prior to this, I've worn a lot of hats as a research software engineer, also done like startup route, and was also at Microsoft supporting researchers and scientists.
Thank you. So let's sort of start off with the hopefully sort of obvious question. What's the difference? So maybe I can go around the panel members firstly and ask if you could describe your role as sort of digital research discuss your role regarding digital research infrastructure, sort of within sort of the industrial or industrial environment, and how you think it may differ from sort of the academic environment. You'll give us a sort of a rundown of what the type of role within your industry, and how that research thinks may differ from a sort of academic environment.
All right. So within Unilever, as I say, Unilever is a big company, so not everybody knows what everybody else is doing. There are different ways that we engage with digital research infrastructure, HPC, however you want to call it. On one extreme, you have people from R&D, from research and development, that want something, some problem, some question being answered, and they just go to a third-party supplier, and that third-party supplier uses HPC, so that is one way. And on the other extreme, you've got specialists inside DRD or inside R&D that can indeed interact with HPC directly. Myself, for example, I'm a avid user of Hartree HPC, and I've got a team of CFD engineers that we also work with Hartree. And then there is a middle ground in which we interact with researchers which are associated to those institutions, and we also leverage their computational power and their cutting-edge approach to research, which we may not be familiar with at the time, and that's how we learn as well. Thank you.
Maybe come back to you at the end, Mark, because you have a slightly different sort of view, because you were interacting with research engineers within it rather than being one yourself. So we'll come back and see that point of view. So maybe if we sort of ground the folks who are online. Again, instead of me introducing a given order, whoever has control of the buttons, whichever makes it easier for you, if we ground those folks with the same question.
So I guess one thing that I've noticed listening to the panels over the last day and a bit is that there's a lot of talk about funding, and I suppose that's kind of a little bit above my job description. I don't often need to worry about things like funding. You know, we kind of get jobs given to us, sort of there's a high level program of work that just gets divided between teams, the Met Office, and then those teams do that work. And so there's not really this process of applying for funding in the same way that people at universities have to do. So that's definitely one thing that I've noticed, that based on the conversations that's different, I guess, between industry and academia. So,
and do you have a chance actually there to not so much be sort of requested what you should be doing, but do you have input into the direction in which your project may be going?
Typically, so I will caveat, I guess, everything that I say with I am one SSE at the Met Office. The Met Office has over 100 SSEs across kind of the science profession that we have at the Met Office. There are both teams of SSEs, but there are also SSEs embedded within science teams. And those teams they have sort of defined work. So it's not often, I would say, in my experience, that we get the opportunity to choose what we work on. Our team are given a set of projects or a set of work, and that's what we work on. So,
okay. Thanks. If we can move on to the next panel member. Hey Ash, turn.
Hi there. So I think there's a diverse set of. I'm getting a bit of an echo, but so I'll try and talk over it. There are two different roles that I play. So there's the defence side, and then there's the sort of the UKRI side. On the defence side, we're lucky that you can have a department of sort of 50 plus people that cover everything HPC. So from the applications right the way through to the architectures, right the way through to how they're implemented on the large, very large machines, pettascale machines. On the UKRI side, slightly different, an awareness of grants and an awareness of public money, but also the fact that you've got to have a lot of technical specialists on the HPC side, and you cover that across STFC, UKRI, and have access to all the tier systems, so up to tier 1 and Mark's machine, Archer 2, and so on. So there's a diversity of access there, but also slightly different challenges in that you've got to justify your grant funds and the money that's given to you, but also at the same time, you've got very strong research goals that you need to do. And then coupled with that, you have access to a lot of emerging technologies. And then if you put on my other hat, the NQCC hat, then it's really cutting edge emerging technologies like quantum. So from a defense industry sector side, you have access to the funds and you have a clear budget, clear set of people who know what they're doing, and they're there for a lot of years as well. They don't move on very often, so they build up a lot of experience. On the UKRI side, people change every 3 to 5 years, and so you don't maintain that experience within an organization. You do see it change a lot, and that sometimes causes problems because the skills aren't retained in the organization for longer periods.
Actually, what causes that change? From an academic point of view, when we have funding, it's usually you go get yourself a 3-year grant or something. In the industry, what's the reason for such a turnover where you're not maintaining members of the team for a long period of time?
So I think I was saying that on the defence side, actually you do retain people.
You do, right.
Yeah, and I think it's because they see a very clear plan. Lucky enough to sort of know what you're going to be doing for the next 5 years, and you know what product you're generating. So in that sense, there's a lot of development that goes on for those staff, across and it's also a wide level of development as well. But it's not the norm I've seen in other places, like in UKRI, it seems to be that everybody wants to turn around quite quickly. There isn't this idea of being in the industry for 20 years. It's more like 3 to 5.
And if we get contribution from who we missed now, is it Tanya?
Right. So, because we have two sides of the organization, and this might be a bit complicated. So we have the open source innovation labs on one side, and I think because we work around developing all the underlying infrastructure and tools for the open source community, and that a very, very big community relies on. I would say our main customer are all the developers and all of the users of this open source. So we have to always make sure that we're working in the open. They are basically our compass and our guiding route. Unfortunately, we inherit from many of the barriers and limitations from open source. So we have to puddle through those that are many, but also it's great to be contributing to a tool or something that is used by many, many folks and many developers and researchers across the world. On the consultancy side, I would probably echo what Emma had said. Our concern is not so much around funding, but I would say the speed of delivery and working under a very clearly defined statement of works, because we have paying customers, that could be researchers, could be financial institutions, folks working in the industry, in the energy sector, and basically across any industries. We work under very tight deadlines until very clear milestones on what we're delivering and what that has to be delivered, which is not always the case in industry, also in academia, sorry. Also, depending on the industry where our client or our main customer is, we have a very, very diverse set of requirements when it comes to data governance, security level access, and and platform and sort of tooling that they can use or that they are already using. So we not always have like the ability to choose from scratch some of the tools that we're working with, because we're inheriting from what the customer or our user is already using. So it's not like so easy to come up with everything brand new, like defining what tools and what things you're using from scratch.
Thanks. Maybe we can turn to Mark now, who's seen things from both sides, as it were. Maybe you can sort of give us your insight into sort of industry and how it may differ from sort of academic settings.
So I recognise actually what everybody said. In terms of my job when I was a commercial manager, I was going out and talking to companies large and small, and certainly I've brought in projects with over 1,000 different companies over a 15, 16-year period. And I really enjoyed it. And the one thing I did realise was that industry researchers working in this sort of space are extremely similar to academic researchers. It's just largely that's not realised between either the academics or the industry researchers. I think projects do tend to be shorter, so I completely agree with that, and much more focused on a particular task. And actually I think there's nothing wrong with that. If you think in the Archer and Archer 2 world with ECSE projects, which are 3 or 6 months, it's very similar to lots of industry projects that the EPCC has done over the years. I think we'll maybe come on to this in a little while. It's difficult selling time on systems. People have never made lots of money out of that. We do it, and I think we've got about 70 little companies that come on a rolling sort of 6-month basis. They change over time. They do buy time in our systems, but we don't make lots of money out of them. We never would. When I talk to some of these companies about why they're working with us, they're actually not that interested in the compute. They're much more interested in access to skills and the ability to pick the phone up and have a chat about something. Because you just can't do that with Amazon or Google. And I think there's a real value there that both sides appreciate in my experience. Yeah, I'll shut up there. I think we'll come on to other topics. But I don't know if any of the RSEs that are here have not worked with industry yet in their careers. I think you'd really enjoy it for a bit. Even if you're sitting in EPCC, staff can choose actually. And I think it's really good. I'm
going to pause you just for a moment and ask if there's any questions from people, or we can move on. Any questions so far, or any points anyone would like to make? Yeah, points from online, is there Marion? Or?
No, I just wanted to make my very own point.
Oh, perfect.
Just maybe to give one additional different perspective. So I've worked for a startup for 2 years after my postdoc. And my first impression when I started was, this is great, and people are so much less vain, so it's not about me, and so on. They're happy to say, oh, I don't know that's not my expertise, and it was quite different from what I was used to being a postdoc at the university. But after a while, I got quite annoyed by being told constantly, when I had an idea, so, oh no, the board doesn't want this. The board wants to go, us to go into this direction. We have to make sure that we, that we basically don't have to shut down the startup, and so, and we can't go off. So I think it's probably dependent on where you end up, and so, but there are places in industry where you're basically very limited in what you can do and how much you can actually shape of the work that you're doing.
Thanks. So actually, sort of not far removed from that, then, in some sense, given there's lots of little short projects like that and they're very focused or whatever, do you actually have any balance between sort of operational work and creative work? How much of that is something where you're really creating something new, or are you just implementing something that needs to be done quickly? I mean, what's the sort of balance between, in some sense, sort of if you like, sort of a not run of the mill, but sort of doing something that is in some sense known, or actually being incredibly creative?
So I think I'm kind of privileged in the position that I am at in Unilever, in that I get both worlds. We do get requests from our internal customers, I'm going to call it. So somebody in a certain category, be it ice cream, deo, hair, anybody has a problem that it could use some of our skill sets, and they come to us like, hey, this is broken, or how do we get this better? And that usually entails either a run-of-the-mill simulation, as you called it, and okay, this is a blending time, this, this and that, oh, this is the result, run with it, fine. Or it could be like, actually, this is in line with something that we've always wanted to do. Let's put some money behind it, and let's look out how it's being done. And so you go to literature, you go to researchers, you go to universities, and you interact with them. Sometimes they have an answer, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you need to do your proper research, and then you have to start leveraging other resources, students, and so on. So I don't know what a proper balance, but it's quite balanced. So I don't feel like I'm doing only one thing or only the other.
And if we go online for comments by the panelists on that.
I'm not sure if I can.
Are they coming in? Here we go. Yeah.
So there are actually two different views for the difference between the organisation and the creativity. I think you were asking about. Normally, within most companies, there's a CIO department, and that normally has a real focus on the business as usual activities, the day-to-day operational activities. Most of them are focused on providing IT across the organisation, and their culture is different from research and the research departments. And it's always been a little bit of a wrangle, and it's always been an issue in, I'd say, most industries, because there's a disconnect. There is a set of services that the BAU organisation will provide all the time, and they don't really want to change it. It will be very focused on the enterprise element of the business. On the research department side, there's a lot more flexibility in terms of approaches to new software, new tools, trying to improve collaborative behaviours. So there's a real focus there, but it's difficult to mix the two areas. And I think that's one of the real difficulties, is that if you ask CIO to manage research departments, it doesn't normally work out well. The research and development teams will disappear. Do it the other way around, and you ask the research department to support the CIO, and that works a bit better, because there seems to be some level of respect about the inspiration that research activities do for normal BAU services. So you can have that creativity going in one direction, but for some reason it doesn't seem to work the other way. It doesn't work from BAU to research departments.
Thanks. And which order was she going? Tanya or Emma? There's Emma coming, I think. Yes.
Hi, yes. So, yeah, I guess at the Met Office, we are encouraged to spend some of our time doing learning and development, and things like horizon scanning is definitely part of that remit. So, yes, we are expected to do kind of our operational work, but we are afforded that time to improve our skills. It's only going to make the Met Office better in the end. So we do get encouragement to do things like that. We also sort of within the Met Office, there are a number of communities of practice, and so, as I mentioned, I'm one of over 100 SSEs across the office. We're all working on different things, and so we can use these communities of practice to kind of share knowledge and skills kind of across the board, and so that's another way that we can potentially learn about new technologies, and how we might be able to use them in other areas of the office. So there's definitely a lot of encouragement to do that sort of work.
If we can bring Tanya in for that question.
I would say we are in a very privileged position where I currently work, in the sense that we have the innovation side of things. So we're constantly trying to either improve existing tooling or come up with new open source projects or tools to solve unmet needs in the broader community. But certainly a lot of work that we do on the consultancy side is related to maintaining platforms for data scientists and researchers and research software engineers that are doing some sort of work, depending on the industry. So we do have a balance. I would say it's always good because a lot of the things that we come up, like with new tooling, is very much community and also client driven. So it's always good to work on like these new tools, these new packages, and then have someone that straight away will do some sort of like first user testing and then introduce them very early on in the loop. Helps to identify issues and also set the direction around user experience and developer experience.
Do you have any questions for the panel on sort of the balance on creativity and business as usual? Okay, so let me move the discussion on and ask about sort of your personal skill development. How is that done? You're supposed to maintain work at the sort of cutting edge in some sense, generating new knowledge within the industry, new products, and so forth. How do you get trained in doing this, or are you somehow magically supposed to know all the skills? That is your job. So how does the sort of training environment work within your industry?
Yeah.
Actually, let's go in reverse order. Sorry, I keep picking on you just because you're a bit up. Yes, let's do the panel members online first. And again, I will leave that to the randomness of who's pressing the buttons. We'll get Emma. So, yeah, training within your environment. How does that work for you?
We should try and, if there's any way we could flip so I'm not always the first speaker, like remotely, but so at the Met Office, we have the Met Office College within the Met Office, so we actually have a dedicated section of the Met Office solely for training purposes. So the meteorologists go through training as part of the college, but the college also provide soft skills training, but also, all the hard skills that we need as SSEs and as scientists and as other roles that we have at the Met Office. And so there's a lot of training that is provided internally. I say internally. Some training is obviously outsourced, so we can bring people in, but it's all done kind of via the Met Office College.
So do you have some examples of the types of skills that they're sort of wanting you to have at the moment, or is without being doing anything within the industry you're not allowed to tell us, but what type of things do they expect you to be at the forefront of?
I mean, so there's the kind of basic level training where we'll maybe get new SSEs in, and maybe they're a bit new to Fortran or a bit new to Python, and so we'll have kind of training around languages specifically. We use I think it was mentioned previously by the Met Office staff member in the audience there, but that we have this workflow tool. It's actually, there's a team of SSEs that contribute to the development of that tool. It is open source. It is available to everyone. It's done in collaboration with our partners. And so, you know, we provide training on tools that, you know, we use substantially across the Met Office. So yeah, it's kind of trying to rack my brains now. What else is available?
Oh, it's okay. I can. I'll move on to this lots more. But I'm pleased. You got Fortran. There's nothing you can't do with a Bash script in Fortran. Yeah, that's all you need. I'm sorry, Mark.
I'm going to come in on this point. I think it is interesting, because I think this is where the really good industry academia collaborations are, where industry's thought about a problem and probably solved it, but they're not happy with the solution, shall we say. And a direct example from my world is we've worked a lot with the Royal Bank of Scotland. So the Royal Bank of Scotland, when it was in the doghouse, decided it should be friendly with the university, and it would be friendly with Edinburgh University because we were close and unthreatening. And so we started working with them, and their data analytics team would set us little problems. And it became very clear earlier on that we did not think about problems in the way that they thought about them, to both them and us. And actually it's gone on now. I mean, I think we've been working for 6 or 7 years now, and it's been very, very valuable on both sides. We've learned lots of data analytics stuff that we would never have learned, because we don't understand how big business thinks about data analytics. But at the same time, we've solved some problems with them where they've said, you know, we would never in a million years have thought of doing it that way. But it's just come naturally because it's used in some other area of science we've seen before. And I think that when that goes well, it's very, very valuable.
Yeah. So essentially, sort of, you know, the interaction between academics and industry is you know.
Yeah, it's good, and it's tiny little projects. These can be 4 or 8 week projects, but just lots of them.
Okay. And shall we have Tanya for the same question?
Right. So when it comes to upskilling, we have, I would say, like different components. A lot of that is basically learning on the job. It's very hard that you'll encounter someone that has all of all the technical skills and can work with all the tools and all the new techniques out there. So something that we focus on a lot is the interpersonal skills. Like, can they get things done? Can they work as a team? Especially because we are a fully distributed team and a fully distributed company from scratch. A lot of our work is also in the open and with external collaborators. And then in terms of technical skills, we normally try to put folks in projects where they have the base technical skills, but also have to learn something on the job. And we have folks, we never have an individual working on a project at a time. We always have a team of folks working together. Also, when it comes to personal development plans, I would say we don't have such a set structure as a Met Office will have. So it's very self-directed and comes on with coming up plan with your people manager or whoever is your manager and say, well, these are the skills that I currently have. These are the skills that I want to develop, both technical and interpersonal or people skills, and put together a plan to develop those and have regular check-ins. I would say it's very fluid, especially because we work across many domains. So it is almost like an individual plan that we set up at the company right now.
Thanks for that. And we'll do Ash then. Come back to Waldo.
Hi there. Yeah, so one of the things that we've been trying to do is to...
Oh, we have a sound thing going. Yeah.
It sounds like there's a microphone switched on.
Oh,
in the
now you
call,
went silent.
or in the... Okay.
One more attempt. Yep. Ash, can you put your headphones back on? I think it might be some interference at your end, some feedback at your end. So, you're switching over to your headphones.
Hi, is that any better?
Yes, that's it. Let's do it that way.
Sorry about that. So there's a lot of work going on with on the defence side and on the industry side about onboarding. So there's a long set of activities that are, when people join the business, you've got to make sure you spend pretty much 2 or 3 years doing all of the mandatory training, but all of the skills training as well. So everything from thinking about development plans, technical training plans, and also leadership development. So that happens in the first 2 to sort of 3 years. There's also a lot of stuff to do with skills and opportunities. So upskilling people by giving them small projects to do and having that being a diverse set of activities. And I think that's probably the biggest thing I've seen on the industry side, is that it's all about opportunities. And it can cover pretty much anything that the individual wants to do, but it's got to be related to a program or a project that they're trying to deliver. But external to that, there are opportunities for collaborations with external organizations, international and things like that. So those, if they stay around long enough, they'll get a heck of a lot of skills and a lot of width in terms of training. On the sort of UKRI side, people come in with a diverse set of skills, and I think that's one big difference. Is industry, and certainly in the defence industry, diversity is not the biggest thing, which is a disappointing thing that it just needs continuous development. But on the UKRI side, there's lots of diversity, and I think I mean that in skills, but also in BAME and in terms of ability as well. So that's brilliant, and that adds such an opportunity for people to learn. But also there is an onboarding activity as well, but that's more focused on making sure everyone's got equity of access and equality of sort of the skills development side. So, they get the same opportunities to do the same things. I've not been long enough in here to see what sort of long-term development looks like, but maybe I can leave that to some of the academics to answer.
Okay, thanks. And then we will go sort of Muldoon. So, Unilever, sort of the digital research professionals. What's your experience in sort of development skills that they get while in the role?
All right. So I'm gonna separate the upskilling into 2 groups. On one side, we have an internal learning platform, such as one that was described before, where we get all the mandatory training, but we could also get some, I'm going to call it collateral or side trainings, things that may be relevant to what you're doing, but it's not your main set skill. Say, for example, if you're working in simulations and you want to learn a little bit more about statistics, just so that the presentation of your results is a better one. So you can find those courses in this internal learning platform. More on the core side of your work, then we've got access to university, so we can learn a lot by doing joint projects, collaborations, and so on. We also have access to some software vendors that would allow some kind of training on their software, obviously, but also you do learn how to use their software the best way possible, and that way it puts you ahead of somebody which is just learning on their own or on the university setting. So that would be the other way to do it. So that's more or less what we do.
Okay. And so within industry, is there any issues with sort of access to software and the like? Because I mean, there's with academia, we have completely different licenses from you folks. So when it comes to sort of training and the like, I mean, do you find that sort of software vendors are willing to come to you, or do they just ask for money up front? I mean, what sort of experience do you have with respect to sort of that? Where in academia, we just download stuff for free. Yeah, I think industry has a different issue with that, in that when industry is usually some commercial agreement is needed. And do you find that cuts across some of your training problems?
Well, it depends what the training is for. It depends on if we have already an agreement or a working relationship with that company, or if it's a training company, or if it's a training arm of a commercial software company. So as a client, especially if you're a paying client, usually you don't have that many hurdles. But we also try to get on contract or agreements that they also benefit, not just money-wise. And that is also interesting from the side. And usually it ends up in a publication, it ends up in somebody crediting their software, it ends up in them developing and adding new models to their software and so on, based on the work that was carried out for us. Obviously with all the confidentiality safeguards in place and so on. But yeah, I wouldn't say there is a massive problem with software vendors.
Okay.
Actually, I would.
Okay.
It's very interesting that they have a very strange relationship with academia, particularly when we're trying to work with industry.
Okay.
So the parent company, Dassault, the other year refused to sell me a license because it wasn't in their business interests, although I was wanting to pay them a full commercial rate.
Okay.
And I never understood that, because I would have thought the companies exist to make money. But I think things have improved a lot over the last few years. So two things happen. One is universities can buy, if you want to do a project with industry that requires what's called an ISV code, an engineering code or whatever, a paid for code, you can now do it on a pay-per-use basis, which is great. And generally the company you're working with will pay for that pay-per-use license. Or many of the more enlightened ISVs will now allow the company to port some of their license tokens to you for the period that they're wanting to use your larger system. And that works really, really well. But I do think that some of the ISVs are particularly difficult in this regard. I think they worry that the universities are trying to run a bureau service and they're going to lose out on money. And over the years, it's really, really proven very difficult at times, particularly with a couple of companies.
Yeah, maybe. I think what in the past I found is that universities, and this is from my university years, universities don't usually realize that they are dealing with a company with commercial interests that may be beyond the sales of a license. So a vendor software vendor, they may not be interested in selling you a license because they don't want you to have access to their software, because they're interested in selling that software to somebody else that you may be direct competitors for, or that they will give one of their competitors an advantage over them. So yeah, it may be the case. From my side, I haven't had that issue, luckily. But there are issues between, for example, vendors which they have products that are competitors with each other, and they initially want to talk to each other, then they don't want to talk to each other anymore, so they upgrade their versions, and the new software versions don't want to talk to each other anymore. And if your workflows depend on their software, then you may run into trouble. Even though you're paying the licenses, you had something that worked before, you upgrade, and suddenly your workflow doesn't work anymore. So that may be an issue. That's because of the company's commercial interests. You're not always aligned with the software and their offering.
Yeah, and that's the wonderful world of coupled applications.
Yeah, there we go.
Maybe this is actually a good time to get some folks with comments and questions. In that we're talking about sort of personal development of sort of digital research professionals, and of course you will have experience of that or not. That may be the problem. Maybe you can tell us some insights that you have with respect to personal development, training, any queries or comments, anything that you've got that's great, anything that's missing. Do you get time allocated to train? Do they pay you courses? I mean, just with respect to sort of the personal development aspect, it'd be quite nice to get a compare and contrast between your situation and maybe some of the things we've heard in industry. So let me open it to the floor for a while and see where that conversation goes.
It's 5:45.
It's 5:45.
Worn everybody out.
I know, yeah. Nicky.
Yeah, so this is actually a personal one, and it's from my old life. I was very, very fortunate to run what was then a creative technology team in a museum service, and I as the sort of team leader, we just had like a half day a week where we would just step away from anything we were doing that was considered essentially core business, and we would literally just be fortunate enough to have the time to just go and tinker with stuff. And as a result of that, we ended up sort of experimenting with some new technologies, sort of focus stacking and photography, quite specialised photography stuff at the time, that then later on became vital for some sort of exhibition and presentation work that we were doing as well. So just forcing myself and the team to step away from that core business was invaluable further down the road, really, to experiment and explore technologies.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. And one thing that I find it funny is that when you have that chance of going into a side project, you kind of treat it as a hobby. So you just go into it in full force because you know you have limited time to do it, you enjoy it, and it's a hobby rather than doing your 9 to 5. So sometimes it actually yields very good results going to a side project like that.
Some microphones here, please. There we go. Yes.
Thank you for all the information so far. Mine is more or less related to like observations over the times, what I've seen. Just like from moving from academia into the industry, it's more or less like more difficult, especially when you're just being a graduate or just finishing your program and trying to get into the industries. So you went through a lot of interviews, and over the times what I've seen so far from colleagues and everything is they find it so difficult to go into the industries. Why is it much more like that? And another thing is PhDs find it more and more difficult to go into the industry. At times I've been in interview like, are you a PhD or you're just graduates? So it's more or less like, oh, you are more specialized now. I don't think
so they were more interested.
Yeah,
in
so they are no more interested in PhDs.
Someone who just graduated.
Yeah.
Okay.
So why is he much more like that? And that should be. That's it.
Maybe some of the panelists could comment on that. Is that an experience that the industry panelists have found where there's
I mean, I cannot speak for the whole of industry.
No, but just from personal experience.
I
yes.
think
Yeah.
I think what can happen is that sometimes the position that's advertised needs a degree. Well, first of all, it's not of a seniority level. It's either too low for a PhD, and you're going to be overqualified, or too narrow over your research, or sometimes they're just looking for a position that is not a PhD level position, and a PhD applies and they're like, okay, this is not it. We need somebody a little bit more junior. What I would say to those people is that, for example, there is a sub world in industry, which is R&D. So if you go to the R&D, to the research and development side of a company, they are much more likely to get a PhD, in my experience. provided that the PhD subject is aligned to what they want to do, because otherwise it's also not an advantage.
Yeah, so we're hearing this division in some sense between research and development and sort of business as usual in some sense. So you have to focus on. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think universities have a role to play here as well. So it's quite unusual. Some universities do this and others don't. A PhD student can pause their PhD for 3 or 6 months, go and work with industry, and then resume their studies. Now, some universities don't allow you to pause your PhD. Those that do allow it, it's really good, because quite often you find, some of my students have just been hired at the end of their PhD by the company they went and did their 3 months or 6 months secondment for. And I think universities should do that more generally in Britain, because it really, really works well, I have to say.
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually. I think we can go take that message back to universities and push for that. That's all. That's good. Yes. Just in a second. Does anyone of the online panelists want to have any comment on that before we move on to the next question from the floor?
I was going to make a comment on that, actually. The interesting thing is that when we've seen PhDs and when you see applications for industry jobs, they are very focused in some cases. So it's actually more about CVs and cover letters and demonstrating that you've got a diverse sort of background in terms of research or more awareness of different technologies. If you focus on just the things that you've studied in your PhD, then actually you get pigeonholed in the shortlisting process. So I would say to people, try and have a diverse process through university. So if you've gone through your graduate, you've gone through MSc, and you've gone through PhD, then show that you've looked at different types of technologies, or you've looked at a wider perspective, not just focusing on one bit of science. So, if it's software engineering, you've done stuff that's open source, or you've done applications, or you've done, compilers and things like that, where an R&D organization wants somebody who's a bit flexible. You have the CV that fits that. So I think that's one definite lesson. The other bit is industry wants to focus on projects, but they don't necessarily have a diverse set of people that they can pick from. So they'll pick from certain universities, and it will be the relationship they had with that university. So it is harder if you don't come from one of those universities, because they already have existing project works with those. So I think that's one of the other difficulties from an industry point of view. They'll set up a relationship with the university, and then they'll probably look for students that come from certain departments, which is a failing actually of industry. They should have a wider perspective.
Thanks for that. We've got another comment or question from the floor.
Yeah, so before I come to my comment, I just wanted to say something about short-term placements as well, because not just PhDs, but also for undergrads, this can be important. So for 6 months, I did a placement at UK Atomic Energy Authority in my master's year, and now I work there. So just a personal plug that's a really good thing. More of it would be fantastic. But the original thing you were asking about was training within our organisation. And I just want to kind of take the opportunity to plug the RSE team at UKAEA, Alice Brett's team, who put a lot of effort into delivering some really good software-based training that I've heard from colleagues that they engage with really, really well, and it's worked really, been really useful for them. And I kind of found myself thinking that in my first year or two of my physics degree, that quality of training and software would have been a lot more beneficial than what I actually received from a kind of a physics researcher, that taught me some Python 2 quite recently. I mean, I'm sure there are lots of RSEs in this room who are kind of thinking, no, we don't want to teach, please don't suggest this. But food for thought, I certainly would have found it very useful.
Thank you for that. Any other comments from folks about this? Where is our Sorry, yes.
Yeah. So just following up on the discussion about placements, one thing that a lot of universities are not aware of is UKRI rules now for PhD students say any PhD student funded by UKRI is allowed to request a 6-month suspension of their studies. Now, it needs to be done in collaboration with their supervisor and all of that, but they are allowed to request it. UKRI won't object, so the universities can become more flexible. And the other thing to say is that the CDTs that were mentioned earlier, the Centres for Doctoral Training, have done a terrific job of increasing the number of relationships, because Ash was mentioning the kind of narrow set of universities that had these relationships. I think CDTs have done a huge amount to help with that, but for people who aren't at a university that's one of the special ones or one that has a CDT, you can still, make contact with people like, people at meetings like this to try and find ways of setting up a placement for yourself or your students.
Thanks for that. Then Marion?
Yeah, I just see some agreement with this comment in here, but also a comment from Anya, and I think she can say it herself rather than me reading it out.
Yes, if you'd like to come in.
For me? Oh, well, I think particularly in our company, in Quantside and Quantside Labs, when we post our job descriptions, we never require a PhD or another significant, like another qualification. We do end up having a lot of folks that have a PhD or a research background, because we work within the scientific computing ecosystem, but we focus much more on, again, as you said, like skill sets, like the technical skills that we need at the time, and also like we put so much emphasis on the interpersonal skills, and how the folks can get things done, like how you can get, if someone gets things done. I think that is like also one of the hardest things to assess for during interviews and recruitment loops, but it's worth investing in like this kind of interview process and recruiting processes. Something that also helps a lot, and I've not seen mentioning it though here, is networking, like building a strong network of other folks that are either working on something similar to you or that are working in industries or research institutes that you would like to work in the future, is also a very, very good way, like to start figuring how to build that career and like how to translate your current skills that you've acquired, for example, during your PhD or as a postdoc, into what folks in the industry are looking for as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And if we, just before we finish, Marianne?
Ash has another comment.
Okay, Ash?
Yeah, it was just to say that there are sort of standard set of skills that digital research, but also RSEs should really try and think about. And it's sort of hands-on, some programming, awareness of storage, data science, architectures, networking, especially MPI, and then a good idea of application in terms of sciences. If you can sort of have that diverse view, I think it helps with PhDs, it helps with, getting into industry. It really does sort of give your career a boost.
Thanks for that, Ash. Well, that's us at 6 o'clock, and I think sort of we should, well, the act of a chair is to stop it in time, isn't it? No matter what else has happened. But thank you very much, everyone, for your attention to this. Thank you for the industry panel. And I think we'll close this session. Does anyone require any announcements? And Marianne?
Just a quick note again about the flip charts over there with the post-its. So there are already a couple of post-its. If you have any more ideas for the unconference session tomorrow, please put them on, or put your +1 onto the one that you really like. Yeah, so I just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ideas so far.
Okay, so something to think about with a beer or non-beer equivalent this evening. Okay, thank you everyone for your attendance today, and we'll hopefully see a nice group again tomorrow. Okay.